So if you would prefer not to be recorded, then by all means, please turn your camera off. But I would like to bear in mind that Remy is very relational, so is Eileen, and I do think that Graham is the same, and seeing you is a very nice feedback loop.
Oh yes,
so
definitely.
I do, and you're a good-looking bunch. You know, we've got a nice bunch of good-looking people in Durham and across the way. So we're now at 1907, so let's start. So welcome to the Religious Resources Centre's Racial Justice Lent webinars. We've developed these in collaboration with Remy and other members of the Diocesan Advisory Team. We can congratulate Remy on his new post of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Enabler, and well deserved after all the work he's done over the last few weeks. We're very grateful to everybody who's helped us plan these sessions and who will be in conversation with each other and with you over the next few weeks. You've probably signed up because you're on the Diocesan Lent course. These sessions are not running parallel to the Lent course in the same content. They're meant to be enrichment sessions. So they're in addition to ideas about reflections upon those sessions. We know it's a serious topic, it certainly is, but we're really hoping that you will be able to join us in fellowship and relax and enjoy these sessions as they go on. We actively encourage questions, comments and invitations for engagement from all of you in the chat, which I can keep an eye on as we go along. I'm sure we do realise how vulnerable and courageous anybody is who speaks publicly about their experiences, and we're going to be having that over the next few weeks from lots of different people. I'm very grateful to Eileen, Remy and Graham for their participation, and I hope that you will enjoy them, if not the topic. So we're going to begin. Eileen, would you and then Graham like to just say hello and introduce yourself in a couple of words, and then we'll start the main bulk of the session.
Hello, everyone. It really is wonderful to see so many of you, just because I've missed actually seeing people, so this is good. Yeah, so I'm actually the new UK ME, or Minority Ethnic Advisor in the diocese, and I'm grateful to Bishop Paul for having the confidence in me to do this. I'm also the priest in charge of 2 rural parishes in Teesdale, so that's Barnard Castle Deanery, Winston and Gainford in Plurality, and the entrepreneur priest in Bishop Auckland. Carenza, did you want me to let Graham introduce himself and then I dive in? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're having a good evening. My name is Graham. I am a young people's missioner. I'm reasonably new in post. Previous to that, I was a student at Durham, just graduated doing a degree in theology from Cranmer Hall in Durham. And previous to that, I was a professional graffiti artist working across the Northeast, working with lots of young people. I've also been chairman of the board of a charity, detached youth work charity in Concert. Yeah, so that's kind of the stuff I've done. I've been on area action partnerships and like different kind of boards and panels like social health, scrutiny and whatnot. So I've done quite a bit of community engagement as well.
Thanks very much, Graham. That's lovely. Okay, we're going to hear much more about both of you in the next hour or so. So, Eileen, jump in.
Okay, I think I'm going to just give you a little bit more context about myself in terms of where I come from. So I'm of Chinese heritage, and it is quite complicated because China is a huge place. And my ancestors came from Fujian province on my father's side, and Canton, South China on my mother's side. Both have had been diaspora, if you like, Chinese, so that they ended up in Southeast Asia, in what was before Malaya, in Malacca in particular, and then in Singapore as well. My mother had been in Hong Kong when she met my father, who went to Hong Kong, and but they decided to settle in Singapore, and Singapore is my native country. I came across to the UK first for university education. I won't tell you exactly when it was. It will give away how long in the tooth I am. But it was during a time when there were very few minority ethnic students where I was. I was one of 5 in the whole year of my university. And there was a bit of back and forth going on. And then I got married to an Englishman from Stoke-on-Trent, whose background is very, very different from what I had ever known before. And then somehow I ended up back here in UK again, after we went back to Singapore for quite a bit. My previous career, I became part of the Church of England pretty late on, actually something like 2005. After I have had a career in Southeast Asia, in Australasia, and then in Europe, and then in London, as an organization change consultant, as a hospital manager, and as a prison governor. And yeah, so somehow I ended up with being part of the Church of England, which was a bit of a shock, both for me and I'm sure the people who encountered me. And here I am today. So that's a little bit of the context. So when I speak, you might have an idea of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to begin by saying why I'm involved in racial justice. First of all, it's all about God's world. We're called to join the Lord in restoring the world as God intends. And in terms of human beings, in terms of people in the created world that God intended, it's all about relationships. And so we're called to be interested in everyone, every people, from every nation, every tribe, every language, where all are loved and everyone has sinned, but saved by Christ's life and death. And this is, without a doubt, throughout God's word, from Genesis through to Exodus, Daniel, Acts, at the Pentecost and Acts 20, the letters of Paul, like 2 Corinthians, the Epistle of John, and then in the Revelation. And so I'm involved with racial justice because that's what God has called us to be involved with. And it's not because I am a UK minority ethnic person, or even someone who's among the global majority that is marginalized when I'm here in the UK. Because the terminology that the world uses, such as minority, majority, supremacy, or superiority, or inferiority, those are not God's measures. That's not how God looks at people, and that's not how God values people. It's not God's social economy. And God is the judge, and that's why I've got the word justice, because there is injustice in the fallen world, especially in race, ethnicity, nationality, and unfortunately, especially in relation to color. And this is where sin in this context seems to be very persistent and pervasive. It's really strange because when God describes people of color, I can imagine he's very delighted because it's the diverse world that he created. And then fourthly, the world's conversation about racial justice or injustice is fundamentally and systemically and institutionally flawed. Racial injustice, for example, is defined as a BAME problem, a Black, Asian, minority ethnic problem. So, for example, in the British criminal justice system, the sentencing for grievous bodily harm is more severe when the crime is judged to be racially aggravated GBH. So those of minority or colored race were inadvertently labeled as an aggravation. And a town or place with visible minority populations are shunned and considered less desirable. They're always NIMBY areas because they're diverse people, and yet it's what God delights in. There's huge contradiction in all of that. I read a Facebook post just recently, and I'm going to read it to you, and I'm going to try and be quick about it. Here's what someone said. Last night, while waiting to board our airplane, this person was being her usual inquisitive self. This is a 5-year-old child, wanting to meet and say hi to everyone she could, until she walked up on this man. He reached out and asked if she wanted to sit with him. He pulled out his tablet, that's his computer, showed her how to draw with it. They watched cartoons together, and she offered him snacks. This wasn't a short little exchange. This was 45 minutes. Watching them in that moment, I couldn't help but think, different genders, different races, different generations, and the best of friends. This is the world I want for her. In a country, that's the United States, where this person comes from, that is continuously fed, that it's so deeply divided by beliefs, I want her life to be filled with moments like this, not liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat, socialist or capitalist, just human. I have to say that the photograph that accompanied this post was of quite a cheerful looking Black person with a white 5-year-old child, and they were enjoying whatever he was showing her on the tablet. Okay. Well, the second thing about racial injustice is that racial injustice grieves God's heart more than it hurts me. I would rather be invisible in race or color or minority ethnic conversations, challenges, and debates. Actually, it's taken quite a lot for me to speak tonight, and when Bishop Paul invited us to speak during the summer, because passions run really high in such conversations. There's so much angst and bitterness. These aren't conversations. They're always arguments that seem to divide. It's always about a them and us. And there was a recent furore from a colleague, Reverend Gerald Robinson Brown, when he made his comment. And it was so, there's so much angst involved in that I had to leave a group, a WhatsApp network group of Chinese people, because they were so angry about it, and they just insisted that we should all protest militantly against the abuse that Gerald received from all sorts of quarters. And I couldn't bear it. And they said, Eileen, why aren't you militant with us about this? You should just totally, object to how he was treated. And I couldn't do it, because that's not how Jesus behaves. And either I was going to be thrown out, or I had to leave before I got ill. So it's so divisive. And the Chinese, I'm Chinese, have been always regarded as inscrutable. It's actually quite offensive to me when people say that, but we've been told we're inscrutable. But you know why we are inscrutable? Because on the whole, our cultural attitude is to act communally, to protect ourselves. And we have, if you like, culturally decided that we'll be pragmatic observers who let the foolish wallow in their foolish, misplaced pride. So when we hear, I'm going to say this, and I'm uncomfortable in saying this, when we hear a group of white people say, "Oh, look at them. This is how they are," and whatever it is, we are actually quite, how shall I say, blank-faced. We don't react to that. We just think, well, shows how much you know, you ignorant so-and-so, and we don't say anything. But it's why we're inscrutable. I'm sharing this with you because I wonder how many of you realized this before. And in my mindset, when God called me to come to this country to serve him in ministry, I decided that the best way was to assimilate so that I could make more progress in serving where I'm placed, to understand the white and British and be as much as possible like them, to be more effective for the mission audience where I'm placed. But that has had problems, and I'll tell you more about it later. Now, the second reason why I'm involved in racial justice, because I cannot ignore my mother's hurt. I've grown up, I think almost all my life, and only recently her hurt has not been a forefront. But there's always such a lot of desperate angst premised on the destruction and indignity that she had felt she had borne of her and my ancestors and the people of China, Hong Kong, and the diaspora Chinese, and her experience of rejection by the imperial British who came to China and Hong Kong, and then also Southeast Asia. It's really difficult even to speak of it. Opium was introduced by the British, very good at selling how wonderful this particular thing was. For whatever reason, the Chinese en masse decided to take up opium smoking. It destroyed a whole generation of people in South China in particular. And from business leaders, they became coolies and refugees. And I'm sorry, I just had to pause a little bit because it's a bit painful. And then decided that they had to go into exile. So they went to places like Canada and the UK when there was a big call for help for skills to build the railways in Canada, to set up the ports in Liverpool. And then later they found that they were convenient laborers. And in fact, not that long ago, the laborers, the Chinese laborers in Liverpool were actually told that they should be deported. So I can't ignore the hurt I have known from others. There's a lot of wrong that in thought, word, and deed to minority ethnic people and colored people everywhere. And it's not just the UK. My husband, who is white British, he experienced discrimination against him when he worked in a Singapore university, where he was told that, oh yes, you have actually been voted by the students to be the best lecturer, but you can't be included because only the local people can be included. And then in Malaysia, the Chinese are discriminated against by the Malays in Malaysia, and this is in an official capacity. In other parts of Southeast Asia, the Indians and the Eurasians are often spoken of in negative or ways. And this sort of stuff, it's just not right. It's not what the world, not God's world. There's a generational cost of authorized abuse. We all know about the all forms of slavery, international slavery, but then of course there's enslavement that I've spoken about with opium smoking, for example, and deportation, and then unjust structures and orders. So for example, in the Church of England, I know of a curate who was 1 year after me in my college, my theological college, and she was a curate in another diocese, and she was refused priesthood. She was told that she had to wait and they might not give her priesthood because she came from a Muslim background. This is a woman curate who comes from a Muslim background, and they told her that she had to go to this placement in a very extreme Muslim environment area. And she had said to them, look, I will have the fatwa on me. I would be, I'll be persecuted but killed if you did that. And they told her that she should be obedient and that she should have more faith. And when she said they didn't understand, she was chucked out of that diocese. I'm very thankful that today she is a priest in another diocese, but her journey has been very unjust. There's been, and I hate this, reverse discrimination. And what I consider, no one said this before, I'm using this term here today, the freak phenomenon. I was thought to be special because there weren't many Chinese people, there weren't many Chinese women applying for certain jobs. And they thought, I'm going to get this. No, she's going to get this because we'll have kudos for having a minority ethnic person in this role, and nobody else has ever had it. And that's what I call freak phenomenon. I really, really despise that. And the last thing I want to say about this particular aspect, about how it grieves God's heart, is that God gave his son's life to bring us to repentance. By his stripes, only by his stripes, by his grace, by his nature, by love, will we be healed. The next thing I have to say then is that I'm involved with racial injustice or justice because it happened to me. Prejudice and little unkindnesses. I call them little, but maybe if some of yourselves have experienced that, you might not have felt that it was very little. But every little unkindness is an absence of love. Absence of love in thought and word and deed. There's this habit of loose remarks that seem so normal, acceptable. It's just the way it is. Oh, Eileen, it's okay because, everybody says it. And so people have said to me, oh, Eileen, you're not like them. They're Black. I'm sorry, that really, really is offensive. And then I've been told, and oh, you're all right. You've been in this country for so long. You're just like one of us. Well, what does that make me? A banana? Am I yellow on the outside, but white on the inside? They know me so well that they think I've suddenly been transfigured so that I am white. And that is the best thing that could happen to me in this country. Or maybe I'm a wow. What's that? I'm a Western Oriental woman. I'm no longer who I am. I'm stripped off of my ethnicity, my cultural background, my language, and everything that I have known of myself, because that's not good where I've come to. God's justice is born of love. And so I need to live like what Jesus has asked us to, which is love my enemies and pray for those who persecute me. That's blooming hard. There have been unjust vocational and curacy processes, and I have been subjected to that myself. Over 7 years, I was asked to meet up with 6 different priests and then put on hold, this is my vocational journey, for a year by a traditional white male DDO, that's director of ordinance, because he said, our diocese has 100% record of Bishop Advisory Panel recommendations for ordination training. We've never known a Chinese woman candidate, so we just need to be absolutely sure you'd be acceptable as a priest in English parishes. And the reason why I was put on hold by a whole year was because the last priest that I was interviewed by, I was told by the DDO that his wife has been to China to work for a few months. And so she knows all about the Chinese people. And therefore, whatever he reports would be the most important report. His report was, she's wooden. All the answers she gave to me were like textbook. Do you know something? I don't suppose everyone had ever thought about it, but Singaporean Chinese people, probably the highest percentage of distinction, if you like, in examinations. Why? Because for the most important things, you be sure that you give the best and fullest content and answers ever. If that comes across wooden, that's the reason why. Didn't bother to find out, did he know anything about Singaporean Chinese? Oh no, well, his wife went to Shanghai and she knows all about the Chinese. So that was my vocation journey. I got through the BAP first time, by the way, and I was so delighted. I loved my BAP. But the curacy process, well, in the last year of my curacy, I was hauled up by the bishop and said that I couldn't go forward, to be released, because there were complaints about me by my colleagues. For 3 years, I kept silent. I couldn't join in the conversations of it was a large clergy team, my colleagues, because they consistently, every week are subjected to this. Every week, they joked and joked about, they insulted every different person that you could find. They cracked jokes that were, well, all about, well, whether you call it the Irish jokes or whatever, it was just insult after insult against colored people, against minority ethnic people, against different nationalities and countries. And in the end, the complaint was, she has caused us to look like inferior people. She is haughty. She doesn't join in with our jokes. And for a whole year, I went through what is similar to a clergy disciplinary measure, except that it wasn't legal. And in the end, what did they find out? After I was asked to go to a psychotherapist, and then it was found out that, well, in Eileen's culture, you don't speak up against your elders and your betters. If you've got a problem about that, you just listen and learn. And what they considered to be an insult, an offense to them because I did not speak up and join in the fun of those jokes, that was because of my culture. And so the bishop released me, just saying that I didn't know. I had to listen to my senior colleagues. There wasn't an apology. I was just released. I'm at this time going to ask Carenza to display the one that says Very British Workplace Translation Guide. If you could share screen, not that one. The one with words, Very British Workplace Translation Guide. Do you have that?
One second, Eileen, my computer's going really slow. I know the one you mean exactly. Hang on a second.
Okay, That's fine. I'll keep going.
We had it all set up so it was working so smoothly, and now it doesn't want to share. I apologize. Give me a second.
Try and do that?
Yeah, do you want to carry on and I'll find it and then I'll come back and share?
Okay. Right, then the last thing I want to say before I conclude is that last spring, when COVID hit us here in the UK, and everyone started to say Wuhan is the problem, the hatred against the Chinese people was indiscriminate. I've introduced myself as being entrepreneur priest in Bishop Auckland. I could not do my work in Bishop Auckland. I could not appear in the streets at the center of Bishop Auckland because I could be harmed. And then a few weeks later, George Floyd's incident hit. You know, I didn't realize how much it hurt me. Yes, he's Black. Yes, it's in America. But, you know, it affected me so greatly that I actually ended up in hospital. I had to go through a hospital procedure because it had caused me to be so ill. And it's just so deep down that this is so grievous, it's so wrong. And I hadn't realized that the wrong that was done to me, for example, by the church itself, just, well, not that long ago, that it was still being healed inside me. Carenza, have you got that, please? Could we share that?
Yep, it's here now.
Okay, everyone. Now, you might find this really straightforward or even amusing. what everything said in the office really means. Could do means nope. I'll have a look and see means please go away. I'll sort it out tomorrow means I'll forget it forever. We've had a few teething problems. It means it's a bloody nightmare. Let's agree to disagree. You're wrong, but I'm so tired, so I'm not going to argue with you. What have you got on at the minute? Is prepare yourself to triple your workload. I'll see what I can do. You're on your own, mate. It's next thing on my list. I don't even have a list. Sorry, could just clarify some things. What the hell are you driveling about? Is that I've had better days, and so on. Thanks, Kranza, you can take it away. But you see, you might find that really, really normal. But I've spent half my life growing up in a totally different context with a totally different set of languages. I've never heard any of that before, never heard any of those jokes before. Everything has been learned from scratch. You know, jokes are not really translatable because you really have to grow up through them and so on. And so it's been a, you know, it's been a journey. It's been so difficult, and it continues to be. I still can't get a lot of jokes. But you see, at the end of the day, I've been called here by God to serve him. I haven't chosen to come here just because my husband is British. I haven't chosen to serve in the church except because God called me. And so where is the reception, the welcome, the kindness, the body of Christ? Well, what can we all do? I think we need to all reflect honestly on God's word. Be clear about what God's nature is and God's view is in relation to race, ethnicity, cultural diversity, and so on. And I don't mean that the minority ethnic people, you know, should be looked at or treated especially. I hate to say white, yellow, black, whatever it is. We are all just people together. And so it's all of us to return to, you know, what it is that God wants. There's no them and us. I don't want to look at everyone here and say, you're them, and I'm, you know, one of the minority ethnic people. That's pretty gross, actually. Self-examination and repentance is what I wish we could do. There's nothing to do with whiteness or white supremacy or being a minority or a victim of racial injustice. It's just all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and just a little work together through this as we would work through anything else. And I just wish that everyone could enjoy cultural intelligence, you know, enjoy having the attitude of welcome, and the openness and desire to listen, to learn, to be prepared, to be fascinated, and to have our horizons broadened, to sort of say to someone, whomever that is, who is different, to say, I really would love to learn, what you know that I don't, and I'd like to share as well. And it's a mutuality about, wanting to enjoy learning from one another. And I guess the last thing is love. It's 1 Corinthians 13. My colleague Arun, he preached about this just the other week, and he says, let's let go of the clanging gong of mutual strife, and instead, we should proclaim and live the gospel, of the 2 greatest commandments. It's all about love. And so I'll end the way I started. Justice is not guided by love. It is love. It is the outflowing, the overflowing of Christ in us. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. It's going to be probably quite difficult for people to gather their thoughts together and pose questions to something so powerfully personal and so carefully constructed. But if people would like to make comments, or if they would like to pose questions, then please do. Eileen was very clear at the beginning of this in the planning stage that she didn't just want it to be a one-way conversation. So hopefully, Eileen, people will be able to respond to you at some point. Perhaps we'll just take a couple of seconds to give you all some time just to reflect. And then if nothing appears in the chat, we will go straight on to Graham, and we will be hearing his personal experience. So please don't feel pressured into making a comment unless you want to, but let's not lose the chance if you'd like to.
While everyone is gathering their thoughts, what I'd like to do is to change my background screen. I don't know whether people, have worked out what that is. In my early days of my childhood, that was Singapore. And today, if I change my screen, Singapore looks like this, and I'm just going to change it right now. That's it. That is Singapore today. And so, I think for some of us who've had journeys that we didn't, how shall I say, engineer ourselves, there is kind of a lot to be able to ask of us and to be fascinated by, if you like. Yeah, so.
That's really helpful, actually, Eileen. I think also not only because of what you've been saying and the comparisons that are personal, but also because it illustrates how we can all change, how we can change the environment around us, how we can contribute to that, and how what looks like it begins as quite small can actually become incredibly complex and networked. And hopefully you'll have encouraged people to think about how they can be the change that might change the landscape in the next few years in our diocese and wider.
Yeah.
There are no questions in the chat, and that isn't a problem. So Graham, would you mind if we hand it over to you, please?
Yeah, I just want to say, Eileen, I found that really interesting. And I may have smiled at inappropriate times, but it was because I really resonate, especially with the comment about being a banana, because the equivalent would be a coconut. Black on the outside, white on the inside. It's just something you hear. So my name is Graham, and I will tell you my story. And I would say take a deep breath, and I'll tell you this story because I think it's important to understand that I consider my story not particularly harsh. I see it as average for my friends, my social circle. This might not be the case for a lot of people who are about to hear this, but I just would hope that I'm telling you the story that I hope it's helpful. And yeah, so I'll crack on. So I was born in 1980. Yeah, I know I look young for my age. So yeah, I was born in 1980, and I was born in Luton, but I was only there for a week. And then I came back to Stanley. That's where my mum's family's from. So on my mum's side of the family, they are Scottish Irish, been living in the Stanley area. So there's a tartan, there's a kilt, there's a Douglas, the name's Douglas. There's a kind of family crest. On my dad's side of the family, they are from Ghana. So my dad's like first generation immigrant. Well, he's dead now. And he was from Ghana, and that makes me a member of the Gat tribe. So I know my tribe, and I also know my clan, which is interesting. I grew up in a time that was an interesting time in the 80s. I suspect most of you will have seen that time looking around. And it was, I see people reminiscing about the 80s, and my understanding and experience of the 80s wasn't particularly enjoyable. I don't mind saying that I was born in a house where we didn't have much money. We were like poverty. We were in a council house and a council estate. We didn't have a colour TV till I was like 15 or something. We struggled, but my house was full of love. My mom did the best. I grew up with my mom and not my dad. and my mum made sure that I had a lot of love inside the home. Outside of the home was a different story. I was fortunate that we lived near my grandparents and other family members who, again, total acceptance, showed me a lot of love. So my experience with racism, the experience I had, it was, because I was born and raised in the UK, I had to realize I was different. I didn't come from an outside place in, I was raised here, and it was at school. And just incidents happened that I can remember. The famous kind of eeny, meeny, miny, moe rhyme, which you all may or may not be aware of, but there's a particularly racist version of that. And I didn't know that that was a racist word. It's the N word, isn't it? And I didn't know that. And I was saying the rhyme with the other kids innocently because that was just the rhyme you said. And then one day it dawns on you who you are in that scenario. And it's a shocking day. It's a shocking day, that. And obviously when my mom found out I was saying it, she was like, what are you saying that for, kind of thing. And then that's how I bumped into racism. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't realize. And that was that was an eye opener. So the community I grew up in, if any of you have ever been to Stanley or know Stanley at all, it's a pretty hard place. People tend to be your best friend or your worst enemy. My friends from Stanley still, the good friends I have from Stanley, I feel that they'd stand by us no matter what. But another time when I realized, when you realize who your friends are, is when you're standing there, and I'm trying to word this carefully, but the racism I've seen, physical violence isn't necessarily out of the question. Like, just generally the culture I grew up in school, fighting was just a day-to-day thing. People getting stabbed or hit with hammers or whatever, that was like, it wasn't like out of the ordinary to hear that kind of violence, that level of violence. So when people were being racist, and you knew that like organizations such as Combat 18, the National Front, the British National Party, they existed. The people who were part of them were also football hooligans. Years when I was when I was about 28, 29, when I was painting graffiti, I got a phone call from a guy who was a member of, he was a football hooligan, and he was a member of, I think it was the British National Party, and he's got like a swastika tattooed on his chest. And I get a phone call from him because I painted graffiti at the time. I still do. And he says, oh, can you come and paint me kid's garage? And I was like, he's not the kind of guy you say no to because he has a reputation. So I was like, all right then. And I wanted to make money, and I wasn't going to be a coward. I wasn't going to sit there and be scared of my life. I thought, right, I'll go there. And I met him and I talked to him, and I was like, all right then, let's do this. And I thought it could go either way, but he was one of the most polite people I've ever met. And I said, what's the crack with a swastika on your chest? And he was like, honestly, it was just what we did at the time. And bashing people, it didn't matter who they were. It was just, we were in it for the fighting, and they would go on planes to France or whatever and have fights. So it gives you an idea of the culture that I grew up in. So when I think about racism, it kind of, it wasn't like violent all the time, but violence was always a possibility. So I think reflecting on listening to other people's stories as well, it's like, I think it's probably desensitized me to a lot of stuff that is racism, which is a weird place to be, because if somebody's not going to bash us, they don't really care. And it's like, it's hard. That was, sorry, I wouldn't say I'm there now, but I was there in that place where if someone said something to us, I was like, well, if you're not going to hit us, I just don't care. Like, and I became quite hard skinned, and which is, it shouldn't really ever come to that. People shouldn't have to be that way. And that was something that in my teenage youth, I was very much like that, because I realized that people used racism as a tool to try and get to me, like as they would use other tools to get to other people. And if you let that get to you, if you saw people saw that, you either had to fight or you had to act like it didn't bother you. And that made me like, it's almost like working with a tool and getting calluses on your hand. It would put calluses on your person, and you would use that to protect yourself, and you would make walls of iron. And if somebody messed with you, you would just total utter aggression. That's it. There's no middle ground. It's either walk away or total aggression, which was just, it's a survival mechanism. So anyway, jumping back to my story. So in junior school, got in a lot of fights with people bullying and stuff like that, people smashing each other's face in all the time. And but senior school, there was about 800 or 900 kids in my senior school, and there was like me, and there was one other kid who was East Asian, and that was it in terms of ethnic minorities in the school. So fighting just didn't really, I couldn't fight 1,000 people if I had to. So I was like, I just tried to keep my head down. And I really hated my senior school life, to be honest. There was a lot of bullying there, not just racial bullying, but bullying was a real problem at that time. Along with, like, you had a lot of people who were like want to be football hooligans, so they were kind of, again, that kind of thing. But I think it's something that I've noticed as well is I think racism is, it's very different in when you lay a class on that and you look at working class people, because I noticed that people who were racist to me weren't doing it. They weren't trying to hide it. They weren't trying to do it discreetly. If someone was going to be racist here, they would just shout something. Yeah, that was the kind of thing I saw. I didn't really meet many people at that stage in my life that would do it on a middle ground. There was just like, if they were going to do it, it was open, it was obvious, which is helpful because then you know who your enemies are. So that's easy to navigate. You know that person doesn't like you, so it's you versus me. Some of the upshots of that, when I was at senior school, it really affected my character. It affected my education because I just wanted to keep my head down. I just didn't want to have to engage with this fight. I didn't want this war. I was just like, I don't want this. I just want to be able to be me and live my life. And that was really punishing for me personally, because it was just so, it was like a grind. It was like, you just get sick of having to deal with it and you don't want to have to deal with it. And it was a hard time for me, that. And then it came to a head when I was kind of leaving senior school, and I was like, I'm becoming somebody. I'm not a quiet, timid person by nature. You may have guessed that by now. But I'm not a quiet person. I'm not like hiding away in a corner, and I never wanted to think of myself as a coward. So I had just thought, you know what, it is what it is. What's going to happen is going to happen. And when I left school, I was just like, that's the door shut on that part of my life. A psychologist may say I suppressed things or whatever. I just thought, I've had enough of that. That's not me. Then when I went to college, I just really put my personality into overdrive, and I came from a place that I thought was the norm, and it's the norm for the rest of the world. So it was really interesting. I went to college, Durham New College, and I went from being super quiet, bullied, bottom of the social kind of circle, to this larger than life character at the top of the social kind of spectrum in terms of like, you know, like friends and groups of friends. And it was, I developed friends from all over the world. And it was really interesting. It was an interesting time. But the socializing time at that time, I remember being out in a night out in concert and somebody just shouting all N-words should hang in the street, and this guy just shouted it. And then again, you notice who your friends are that just melt away when they realize the kickoff could happen and it's going to be about race. And that just some people will just melt away because they see it as they don't have to get involved, but your proper mates will be there. And I'll say this, that I've been saved since I was 8 years old. I'm not an Anglican. I don't think. I say that because you never know what might happen. I'm free church. I'm quite, that's what I've always been. And I've got to be honest with you, the people I had who were me friends in church, I don't think they would have kind of stood next to us either, which is something I'll move on to later about the answers to these questions and these challenges and these problems. Now, that's not to say everybody should necessarily stand in a bar fight next to you and have you back. I'm not saying that, so don't panic. But I think that there were certain circumstances that became quickly obvious that was not wise for me to be in. And it was pretty quick that I realized that going out and drinking was something I did with my friends every Friday night. And I saw fights every Friday night, especially concert, without fail. And a lot of it wasn't to do with racism, but every now and again, there would be a fight, and then suddenly it would turn and you would know that it was going to be that kind of thing. And it was almost like in the back of my mind, I was always looking for that eventuality. It was like waiting for a bus going, what time's this bus going to arrive? And certain places you go, you just you develop a sixth sense about it. And I just, even to this day, like that life I've left behind, but even to this day, I don't feel comfortable standing in a pub if England are playing an African nation or something like that. Like football is one of the times that I find myself the most uncomfortable. Now that just might be scars from my life and my experience kind of not dealt with properly, but the times I've seen racism from people who are in my social circle, and they'll say something wildly racist when they're watching the football, and it's passion, it's whatever. And I'm just like, my granddad fought in the war and he was captured, and a German bayoneted him in his posterior, tried to kill him. And I never saw him show any racism towards Germans. And he went to a prisoner of war camp and whatnot. And I was like, if he can not show racism towards Germans, and you get upset because somebody kicks a ball and you don't like it, I'm like, you need to check yourself. Anyway, I don't want to go on a rant. But I've always found football in certain circumstances. I mean, there's nothing wrong with watching football at all. But for me personally, it's just been an experience that's where I've seen racism just pop up out of people who should know better. And then they'll realize what they've said. And it creates when one of the questions I got on the PowerPoint that I found really interesting was, what is it really like to be on the receiving end of racism? And I've really been thinking about that, because I don't assume that just because somebody's white in England that they've never been on the receiving end of racism. But I do think there's a big difference when you're a minority in a situation and then you are on the receiving end of racism. I think that is different. So when we talk about racism, I really think context matters, because when you are a minority and somebody's racist to you, two things go on. One, it's an acknowledgement of your difference between you and everybody else, and everybody's different, everyone's an individual, but it makes a them and us situation where you feel like you are definitely, it's like a big finger pointing at you going, there's less of you than there is of us in this situation and you're different. And that's one of the big things that when racism happens. And the second thing is when somebody's racist towards you, they not only insult you, they insult your children, your parents, your loved ones, your friends. And it's a really, like, if someone was to come up and just talk to you as a person and go and insult everybody in your family in one foul swoop, I mean, that's pretty irritating, to say the least. Hard time to be a Christian, I'll say that much. So that's challenging. But yeah, so I've seen shouting in the street, just people just randomly shouting racist slurs in the street. One of the most irritating times for me was when somebody was racist towards me and they picked the wrong race. I was like, if you're going to be racist, at least be accurate. I mean, I think that was the only time I've been speechless about racism in my life. And me and my mate were walking up, and he's black as well. We were walking up, and there was these two young lads, and they were shouting racist slurs, and we just had to stop, and we were just like, you need to up your game. You really need to up your game. Anyway, so you kind of, after a while, when you've lived with it on your doorstep kind of thing, and it's just been around you, it can affect people in different ways, and you have different seasons. But it feels like you're in a war, and you don't have a choice. You don't have any downtime. You're just waiting for the next bus to come. You're waiting for that next incident to happen, and I find myself, I mean, again, different experiences. Eileen may have a different experience to me, but I find myself almost like you're sitting cleaning your weapons for the next fight. That's what you feel like you're doing sometimes. You feel like you're having a nice quiet period, but you're just waiting for that next thing. And that's how I felt for a lot of years. I've got to admit, nowadays, not so much. I think that, but in my youth, I consider myself young now, but over the last, say, 10 years, I've seen quite a positive change in the world, but it's still out there. But I think in working class kind of, especially like lad culture, we'll call it, like working class men's culture, I think that it can pop up. But other times it's really interesting that it can be, I've seen people, I've got a friend and he's Cypriot, and he's received racism quite a lot, and he's quite olive-skinned. He could easily pass as being white, but it's interesting because he's got quite a strong cultural heritage. He's really loud about what he is, and he's received racism. And it's sometimes you find yourself making friends in adversity, in this face of this racist adversity, and you just kind of like you just get used to making friends with people that are different, which, you know, it's useful at times. It makes you kind of, it can be useful, and it makes you not scared to sit next to the person, because sometimes you've got to we were talking in a Bible study about sitting next to the person who other people wouldn't sit next to. And I realized, wow, when I was young, I probably was the person that people wouldn't sit next to, which again, I laugh about it, but you know, so yeah, that was me kind of childhood. I mean, it wasn't all bad, and it wasn't all kind of like the threat of violence and that on my neck, but it was part of it. I found that I was always the one that stuck out in the crowd because there wasn't many black people in Stanley. There was like 4 of us, and if there was 3 of us in a shop at once, you better believe we were being followed around the shop. And it was just, you know, all the kind of the weird stories you hear about what people do, a lot of them I've experienced, like the stop and search from the police was ridiculous at one point. It was like I couldn't get my friend's car without the car being pulled over. Like every time I walked around, it was like, I don't know, say 1 out of 3 times I'll be stopped and search, and it just, yeah. So that was kind of like, say, heading up towards the age of about 20 something. I started a business in 2004, painting graffiti. And I found that a lot of the things that Eileen was talking about in the workplace, I just wasn't up for tolerating. And I just, because I'd experienced, if somebody was going to say something to us, I'm not the kind of person to just let it go. I'm not the kind of person to be quiet about it. And if you say something like that, you had better be willing to kind of stand before us and we'll have a chat about it, kind of. And I mean chat, I'm not saying I will threaten people or anything like that, but at the same time, I learned that in a situation where you are dealing with a power struggle, or it doesn't do well for you to be perceived as weak. And I just thought I had been a victim and I had been bullied before, and I'm not about to have it happen to us again. So I started my own business and I did that for quite a long time. And yeah, so that was kind of a real game changer, because I found that I was the boss and then I could do all these things. Alongside all of this, all of my experiences, it really, theologically, it's challenging when you hear people talking preaching from the front about turning the other cheek, because that is a particularly challenging theological kind of thing to wrestle with. Because when people say turn the other cheek, it's like, wow, how sometimes it's easier to turn the cheek than it is others. And then sometimes you think to yourself, well, should I be turning the cheek, or should I be knocking that person out? Yeah, so that was a theological thing I struggled with in me kind of younger days. Yeah, so I moved on to running a business, and I was painting graffiti, and to be honest, I just wanted to swan around at festivals looking really cool, painting graffiti and getting paid for it. That was my thing. I'd found a place, an acceptance from hip hop culture. I found that it was really good. I could be cool. I could be like this person. And then there was a prayer meeting, and somebody said, God's telling me that you're going to work with young people. And I was like, I don't want to work with teenagers. That's not my thing. I can't be doing with teenagers. I didn't enjoy being a teenager that much, and I didn't really want to hang around with teenagers for a living. But I found that I could use the experiences I've had and the challenges I've had to teach with passion. And I have specialized in working with young people that are on the peripheries, maybe young offenders or with behavioral needs and additional needs, such the like. And I found that I've really done quite well working with those young people. And you encounter racism in many different ways. And since I'd kind of got a bit older and wiser and a bit less angry about these things, and I've learned to kind of like, I've had to go, I think, a lot and heal a lot myself, and try and understand. Because I think where I am now, where I think now is, I don't really see that much use in labeling people as racist. Because once you've labeled somebody racist, in my experience, that's one of the worst things I could ever call somebody. And I think to kind of, whether they are being racist or not, I'm more interested in trying to change their perspective. And I'm more interested in trying to understand why, because I've found that in the understanding of why, you can find a change, you can find an answer, you can work with that. There are 1 or 2 people I've met where they're just, that is their ideological position and that is what they believe, and you're probably not going to change them. I mean, the Holy Spirit absolutely can, but it's a fight I wasn't willing to have. But I found a lot of young people, I've worked in most kind of rough estates, so to speak, in the Northeast, and most of the young people there have been fine. You do hear racism, and a lot of the time it's more to do with ignorance. It's more to do with teenagers will say anything to shock people. But I found that a lot of young people, once you've talked to them, once they've actually met somebody, because it's a reality that some places they just haven't met black people, for example, or they haven't met Chinese people, and they'll say things, and it's just sitting down and taking the time. It doesn't necessarily make it not painful or irritating, or but it's worth doing, and that's kind of where what I do when I make those things now. And also, I think it makes us really empathetic to kids who have been bullied as well, for whatever reason. And I like to really kind of challenge that behavior. In terms of what my answers are after 40 years of kind of, well, we'll say 38 years of reflecting and thinking and living this, I don't like to spot problems without coming up with an answer. I think that in terms of church, like I say, I'm reasonably new to the Church of England, and I've always thought of it as an institution, and any big institution is going to have problems. I trained at Cramner Hall, and for those who don't know what Cramner Hall is, the ordinands are trained to be vicars there, and there was quite a few people in my kind of, I don't know what you call it, class cohort, my year group, and it was interesting to see the diversity of their kind of theology and also political positions. It was quite interesting. But moving forward, I think some helpful tips I would say are, if you care about this stuff and you want to make a change, it's helpful to try and put yourself in a position where you are a minority, just to see what it's like. Like, if you can have an opportunity to attend, like one of my close friends growing up was white, and he'd never been in a position where he was a minority. We went to London, and we went to a party with my dad, and he'd never been in a building where he was a minority, and he was there for an hour, and it changed his perspective on life. So it really gave him, it just opened his eyes to what it was like, because there's things that you just get used to when you're in that position, that it's hard to explain to people. And it's not a matter of fault or blame or saying you should do this or you shouldn't do this. It's just see what it feels like, because it will open your eyes. It will just open your eyes to the little things. Also, understanding other cultures. I mean, now we have YouTube, we have the internet. There's really no reason why you couldn't subscribe to a few YouTube channels, for example. And it doesn't really matter so much what they're about. It's just understanding the perspective and issues. I've really noticed a big change since the internet has hit. I've seen a change in young people, because they eat YouTube up, but they have the ability now to watch somebody from a different country talk about day-to-day stuff within their country. And it's not like a lot of times when you see African nations on the TV, and in the 80s and 90s, it was like some kid with flies on the face next to a mud hut, and everyone thought that was the entire of the continent of Africa. And it's like, wow, that's just, come on now. But like, so it's yeah. It's
Andrew, sorry, Graham, I don't want to stop you in the flow, and I'm struggling a little bit to know how to manage some of this, because we've got some questions in the chat, but you and Eileen have spoken so powerfully and in such a fluent way that I'm concerned we're going to run out of time and not have had anyone in the room a chance to respond to either of you properly. Yeah. Eileen said very early on, we can't have one of those webinars where we just talk at people. And I'm sitting there going, oh my goodness me, it's 8:15 and we haven't had a single question in the room yet, which is slightly anxiety. There haven't been many contributions from people in terms of questions. And I want to thank you both so deeply for the contributions that you've given and the insights that you've given, and for sharing some really painful and difficult stuff. There's lines I'm taking away that I'm not going to lose for a really long time from both of you. So thank you for that. But there is something I think that will come up later in other webinars, but we do need to have a little note of it now. and that is discomfort in the room. There was a little comment from Andrew and a response from Graham Young that I think we should know, along the lines of, I can see things are difficult, but I'm struggling with the idea of the institutional racist church. I think it's hoping I'm being fair, Andrew. And then a response going, well, in a post-colonial society, we're bound to be in a difficult and racist church environment. So I was wondering, Andrew, if you want to say just something quickly, because Remy needs to say things before we leave, but if Andrew wants to say something about that, and then perhaps our two speakers could reflect on that just as a response, because I think it's quite important that we actually deal with that question. Andrew, do you want to unmute yourself and say what you wanted to say? Maybe he doesn't. Andrew, you're talking, but you're not unmuted. Lovely.
That's worked now. Good, jolly good. I won't just repeat what I put in the chat, but I do have a feeling that people like me who are male, white, educationally privileged and belong to this culture that have been victorious in 2 world wars, have never really been culturally as a whole humiliated, are not only at a bit of a disadvantage in a discussion like this, but actually don't feel as if I have got a lot to say. In upbringing, I've always been taught to respect people of different cultures and of different skin colors, and I eventually learned that it's not great to tell Irish jokes or really any kind of joke that's aimed at anybody except myself, my own kind. But there is emerging, and I think there's going to continue to emerge, a theme of what can we do about this, i.e. what do I and others like me sort of need to do or to change in order to be better racial, even though we don't regard ourselves really as having been racist. I'm listening. I mean, I especially appreciate the tips that you were starting to give there, Graham. I thought that was very helpful. So that is just starting to get into, listen, understand, get into what people of other cultures are feeling and thinking about, what is their background, so on like that. That is very useful. So that's enough from me. Don't really have a lot to say.
Can I just say something? Well, I mean, just as part of response, but more on a general level. I think one of the reasons behind these gatherings is people have always asked that question, what do we need to do? And a very important thing is, and I've always said it, start from where you are at. And the place we're currently at as a diocese is to say we need to learn more about what goes on. Graham spoke in terms of frames of reference that are developed from people. They look at the TV, they look at newspapers, intergenerationally, they develop a frame of reference. And once we can start sitting down and understanding what's going on behind, that helps us become more equipped to then appropriately respond to what's going on. Because Graham highlighted another point, if you respond negatively, what happens? You get labeled. And the important thing is we need to all become informed, educate ourselves, become equipped, and then we're able to respond. But a reason why I don't think we respond is the discomfort. We're uncomfortable. It's easy to sit down quietly than raising it. And so when people say jokes, then we're quiet about it, because guess what? We sit in our comfort zones. But let this be the starting point. And the whole idea of this course is we need to learn to confront ourselves. So where are those unwanted parts of my life that I need to re-examine? And that's what today is about, and subsequent, webinars. Okay. Thank you.
Is that Graham with his hand up? Graham Young.
Graham?
You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Graham.
I'm just, okay, managed it. I think, yeah, there is so much here that one could talk about. I think what Andrew was saying, one of the problems that we have particularly in charitable or church organizations, is that we have something called toxic positivity. Toxic positivity is where we all believe that we're so positive about everything that we are here and therefore we can't possibly be racist, because we're here in order to love people. So we can't possibly be racist. But the reality is our upbringing, our whole colonial history has created racism within us, which we have to turn and look at inside ourselves and not for other people. There are different levels of racism. There's personal racism, there's interpersonal racism, there's institutional racism, and there's structural racism. We're not talking about, when we say the church is institutional, we're not saying the church calls Black people names. We're saying that the structures of life in the church are racist because of its history, and we have to turn and look at that. So I think we really have got to, we as white people, and that's why I object often to people of colour being placed in positions where they're responsible for DEI. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's people of colour are not responsible for those problems. We as white people are responsible for those problems. And the problem with putting people of colour in positions where they are responsible for DEI is that they become the problem, because they raise the issues that we should be dealing with, and they get labelled as problem people. And so I think we really, as people not of colour, and particularly people like me, an old white man, I really have got to look at me and my background and what has made me to see what structurally creates racism, which I, even though I've worked in international development all of my life, I still exhibit, and I need to look inside.
I think that's a really helpful contribution, Graham, but I'm also really grateful for Andrew's question, because I think that's exactly the kind of question that we are going to be confronting and asking as we go through with different groups. And I think that's really, really helpful. I would like to be able to hand over to Remy for the last 5 minutes. I'm aware that I've cut across our speaker, Graham, which was unkind. And I apologise for that, Graham. And we could have heard a lot more from Eileen. I think what Graham Young has pointed out about this has sparked off so much and so many questions. I need to go away and think now with Remy about the model of the webinars that are coming, just because we need to make sure that we can hear these stories and do them justice, but also give people the chance to process it. And it might be that whacking questions in a public chat is not the best way, and it might be a whole range of other things I need to think about. So I'm going to learn from today and go away and think about that. I think that's going to be helpful for me. Go on, Graham.
Can I just say quickly to Andrew's question? I think that I would say that don't feel, personally, this is just for me, don't necessarily feel like that I say these things to you, I've told my story, but don't feel you have to run out tomorrow and do something. Like sometimes the opportunity to do the right thing will arise and it'll just come on its own. And I wouldn't feel like you have to run out and go and do something because you feel the need to do something. And I'm seriously, when I say this, I don't want to make people feel guilty because of the color of skin they were born in, because you've got no choice. You were born the way you were born. I was born the way I was born. You didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't have anything to do with it. So I'm not really too keen on making people trying to feel guilty. And I want to be clear about that, because I was born, just by being born in England, I was born privileged above millions of people across the world. So for me, I'm not really into incriminating people or making people feel bad. What I am about is we're here, where we are, what can we do now to make things better? And that's that's where I was going to conclude with. So I just wanted to let people know, yeah, that's that's
I'm
happening.
really glad you got those words in, Graham. Thank you. And it was also, no, 1 second, Eileen. Oh, no one's expecting one webinar or one Lent course to solve the issue and do the problems. That's not what it's about. Remy has talked repeatedly with me and in our groups about this is a starter for discussion. This is each of us looking where we are, and the webinars that are coming look at a whole variety of questions and things that you might not have considered. So if you think of a Hebrew scripture story and there's something in your head, then you're thinking, what color are those people? How much justice do you do to Hebrew scripture and its origins? There's a whole range of things in churches we don't even think about quite often, week by week, because we're busy. But we're going to be looking at those things over the next few weeks. Eileen, sorry, before we go to Remy, Eileen?
Yeah, so try to be quick. Really, what Graham has said, I fully concur. It's not anyone's desire, and I know it's not God's desire for anyone to wallow in guilt. So, you know, when I was in theological college, one of the worst classes that I attended, you know, it was such a shame because I really wanted to learn a lot about it. But every time there was a mission class, it was the first third of it was an apology. So we apologize for all the missionaries who are white, who went out during the imperial period and, you know, brought the good news to people in all the different countries. And we're really, really sorry about that. I mean, it's like, good night, you know, I'm here. Hello, you know, God, you know, came to us in whatever form. And it's not about wallowing or remaining in guilt and regret and apology. It's what we do together from here together. You know, it's not about beating yourselves up, because, you know, tables could have been turned. It could be any color. It happens to be white. There happens to be the, you know, the ones that, you know, colonized a lot of people and so on and so on. So I think we just need to readjust our thinking.
Right, and just for the last few minutes, I mean, before we close, a very important question was raised, and it was when Eileen started. She had asked the question, why? And in response to what we do, or what should we do, maybe we need to grapple with that question, why, first. Why are we here today? Why are you here today? Why are we discussing this? And once we've dealt with the whys, we can deal with the hows. And that very much comes from Arthur Frankel's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He survived the concentration camps, and he was very much about, let's deal with the whys, and then we deal with the hows. So that will be my closing thought for us all. Hundreds of themes have come out from this today: language, identity, labels, survival, living on the edge, culture, perceptions, etc. Lots of them will be picked up in coming webinars. And next week, Karenza will be talking to us based on the resource center. And they're not only a resource center, but they're a resource in themselves. And she'll be talking to how we as churches and as people can actually become resources. And we will also have the National Minority Vocations Officer with us, and she'll be talking about a lot about what's the ideal thing about heaven. What do we want it to be like? She'll be raising so many questions. So please come next week as we hear more and more. And what I'll encourage us to do is please send in comments. And I would say route them through Karenza, because over the next 2 years, there'll be lots of events happening. And so send in your thoughts so that your thoughts can inform where things go. Sadly, we don't have lots of time to talk, but that doesn't mean we can't pick it up down the line. So please send in thoughts to Karenza, and they will help shape the future over the next 2 years or so in terms of what's going on. And I just want to thank the speakers and thank you all. And just please go home and do something well, you're already at home, but before you go to bed, try and do something restorative, but think of what you can do, but don't rush into it, as Graham said, and I agree with that. But I will conclude with the prayer that will hopefully hold us, and the prayer for peace and justice. And it's there on the screen. And, let's share that prayer together. Grant us, Lord, a vision of your world as you would have it. A world where peace is built with justice. And where justice is guided by love. May we know your compassion for all who suffer, and your courage in challenging complacency. We ask this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Amen. But thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you all next week and in the weeks ahead. And I would also like to acknowledge Mark, who's with us from Bristol Diocese, and he'll be speaking to us at some point. So thank you very much, everyone. So Carenza will dismiss you all. And some of us need to stay behind, but take care.
Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a privilege.
Yeah, blessings to you all.